A new family joined the church. The music director was elated because the husband was a great tenor, and every choir needs another tenor. Am I right? But there was one problem. It turns out one of the basses had worked with the new tenor in a job in years past, and the tenor remembered that the two of them had gotten into a big conflict. And so the new guy, the tenor, would not sing with that bass. He didn't join the choir. You'd think this thing wouldn't happen in the church, right? We're Christians. You would think that the people Jesus gave his life for would be the happiest, most forgiving people in the world. We're a church faith community. So you'd think that the people who are accepted as they are would be a community where no one is lonely and where people would live in harmony. But sometimes that's not the way it is. The church is not a club where you choose your members. The church is for all comers, and it welcomes all people. And let's face it, people, including you and I, can sometimes be difficult, selfish, and unreliable. A community means that it welcomes all people and all their diversity that come with them. And usually we think about diversity being a good thing, and yet it can cause conflict because those differing people come with their differing points of view and they have to duke it out. Which is why I say that it isn't Christian community unless at least one person drives you just a little bit crazy. That's the hallmark. Things weren't really any different back in the early Christian days. So Jesus included some instructions for his community, which we read about in the gospel lesson today. Jesus had just finished instructing his disciples about not putting stumbling blocks before the little ones. Little ones are anyone who is vulnerable, and they must be treated with great care. And as it turns out, the community itself has vulnerabilities. The community isn't big enough to have two people who refuse to talk to each other. It's torn apart when people talk behind each other's backs rather than addressing the matter directly. And so Jesus lays out a process for addressing grievances. First, you go to the person who wronged you and tell them what hurt you. You are to go not only with your own concern, but also with an openness of heart that you might listen to them too. If that is heard, well and good. But if not, then you take it to 2 or 3 others who can act as witnesses. And if that doesn't work out, then you take it to the church. And if a solution still cannot be found, then the offender is to be treated as a tax collector and a Gentile. Ideally, this process helps both parties to listen and forgive, because often situations are not cut and dry. Most often, both people have some part to own in that argument. But what does it mean to treat a person as a tax collector and a sinner? A tax collector and a Gentile, as Jesus says. Some in the church have assumed that this meant you place those people outside the boundaries of the church, like an outsider. Both collectors and Gentiles were indeed outside the community of Jews. And in so many aspects of our lives, when reconciliation fails, we pretty much do the same thing. Vote them off the island, cancel them. Goodbye. So often it seems the easier and perhaps only solution is to part ways. And in especially difficult situations, distance may be the only way that people and community can be protected. But I note that this is not the way Jesus treated tax collectors and Gentiles. He did not vote them off the island, say goodbye, goodbye, cancel them. Sure, they were outsiders. Tax collectors were traitors. Gentiles were foreigners. But that meant to Jesus that they simply required a special invitation. In fact, Matthew, who gave us this gospel, was a tax collector himself. And so Jesus' emphasis in his behavior and his teaching is always about reconciliation, extending that invitation, welcoming back the lost and even those who are wrong. Which reminds me of another choir. It was the a cappella choir I sang in seminary. We were known as the Sacramental Whiners. Get it? When I joined the choir, it had been invitation only up to that point, and it was starting to be viewed as a clique. So the choir decided that it was time to have open auditions. Everything was going well. The days of the audition started until a woman named Sharon came to audition. One of our members, a woman named Danny, was really standoffish, kind of rude. Sharon auditioned well, nonetheless, and afterward, as the group began to process the different people who had come forward to sing, we said, let's invite Sharon. She sings really well. I think she'll be a great addition to our group. And everyone was of one mind except for, you guessed it, Danny. She had all kinds of reasons that Sharon shouldn't join the group. To make a long story short, we found out there had been a history of conflict since the beginning of seminary between these two women. And Danny wasn't sure she could stay in the group if Sharon was in it. I was in a tough place because I was friends with both women. And to be honest with you, they had a ton in common. They were both strong leaders with big personalities, but they felt threatened by each other. And a few misplaced words at the beginning of their relationship had turned them on one another. Listening to the depth of the hurt, I wasn't sure a solution could be found. But coming back to our next meeting, I was surprised to hear what Danny had to say. She said that she had been praying and that she no longer felt right about holding this grudge against Sharon. And so we asked Danny to make the call to tell Sharon that she was in the group. Our first rehearsal with our new members was the occasion for some frank discussion led by one of the founding members of the group, whose name was Verity. She talked about how we were making music together, and that making music entailed trusting one another and being open to each other. Slowly, Danny and Sharon shared how they had been enemies and how they were glad for this opportunity to start anew and overcome the hurts of the past. When all that was needed to be said was said, we sang together for the first time. We held hands and sang Amazing Grace. And it was amazing. Being a part of a Christian community doesn't guarantee that there will be no conflicts and no hurts. It doesn't mean that some people won't take their ball and go elsewhere. But it does offer a different way, a way that is ultimately more healing and more growth-filled than the places where we can just write people off. Jesus said, "Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there." I often think of this saying when it's an unusually small Bible study, and I'm trying to reassure myself that what truly matters isn't the numbers of people, but the fact that God is present. God shows up. But when you consider it here in this context, its original context, in the midst of a passage about a community dealing with conflict, it functions as a reassurance that despite our careless words, despite our negligence or our unwillingness to listen, that God is nonetheless persistent in the midst of conflict. God is nonetheless present in the midst of conflict. As imperfect as we are, God has not written us off. God continues to work for reconciliation in and through us. We are living proof that Jesus is with us. And as our hearts open and we receive his forgiveness, we can gradually extend it to others. When Jesus shows up, amazing grace can and does happen. Amen.